Welcome to another episode in our personal empowerment audio series, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder, and our program today is about the self part of that, finding yourself in paradise. We're going to talk about the awake being, the awareness. We call this one Breakthrough to a New You.
The truth of the self is that it's complex. I don't want to say convoluted, Steve, because it's not really confusing. It's just that the self has many layers. I think it's quite well organized, actually.
Kind of like Russian nesting dolls in a way.
Yeah, surprise, surprise, we're on the same page with this. It took it right off the tip of my tongue. There are selves within selves, within selves, within selves, higher selves, and not so elevated points of view. And the very fact that we can look at the self as having these layers or these levels, or the degree to which we're nested in an even higher self or a greater sense of self, that speaks very highly of a level of self that we've attained. It's just that we have so far to go in realizing what remains.
And the very fact that we're asking the question, that we are looking at different levels of consciousness, reflects some consciousness, some awareness and some conscientiousness, some caring about who we are and what we're becoming. But that's really what we're talking about, is the higher self, not the thoughts that you have and not the feelings that you have and not the body that you are or the possessions that you own, but the very awareness of the fact that you have thoughts and that you have feelings and a body and possessions and all those things, and that you are not compelled by any of those things. You are at choice. You are able to see the big picture and look at all the different components of who you are and be at choice and make the choices that are best for the whole being. I think you said it just before we went on to do this earlier today. You said something like, you're not a thing, you're a point of view. I think that's a fascinating way of looking at it.
And to discern that particular point of view and then continue that process of being even more discerning in fine-tuning or calibrating, well, what is my point of view? And what choices do I have within that? After all, I do have free will. I've been granted, I don't think there's much of an argument about that. I think we also have a certain degree of fate or predestination within which we operate, but we are willful creatures. We can choose to align ourselves with a greater interest of all concerned, or we can be very self-centered. In fact, I think this is a good place to begin, Steve, to define this higher self and the sense of self that we all have as a matter of degree, really. It seems very clear to me that the primary roadblock for most people in self-development is a concern that if they care too much about themselves, self-improvement, self-help, who am I really? Why do I do the things I do? And so on. If I get too involved in that, I'll become or be perceived as having become egotistical or pompous or arrogant or full of myself. The funny thing is, somebody who is full of themselves really doesn't know themselves at all.
Really, because arrogance is just an overcompensation. It's not really knowing yourself. It's like being so desperate to know yourself that you project this who you'd like to be instead of who you really are. You know, we're talking about who you really are. I mean, the authentic self, the true you, the new you. You have thoughts, the conscious mind thinks things, and you have feelings, the subconscious mind experiences emotions. And you know, sometimes it's thought, feeling, thought, feeling. But when you can step back and look at that happening, when you can step back and observe, oh, I had a thought about my wife. Oh, but that made me feel really good. Oh, but that made me think I need to do this other thing. If I can be not the person thinking that thought or feeling that feeling, but the part of me that can step back and watch me have this inner dialogue between my thoughts and feelings, now I woke up. Now I'm aware. Now I can choose which thoughts I want to agree with and embrace them. I can choose which thoughts I don't want to hold on to, and I can literally, with the release of a breath, with a sigh of relief, release them, and I can tune into the feelings I'm feeling, and if they're love kind of feelings, positive feelings, I can enhance and amplify them, and if they're fear-based feelings, I can confront them, experience them, heal myself of them, and then move on.
I think we mentioned this a few weeks ago, but it certainly needs to be repeated. It's really only been about 100 years that so-called psychologists, scientists in the field of awareness and psychology and who am I and personality and character and these kinds of issues. It was only around the turn of the 19th century that the father, we can name him actually, the father of American psychology, William James, wrote very clearly, the greatest discovery of my generation is recognizing that we are not simply who we appear to be, but so much more, that we have this remarkable untapped potential. Now, that was 1902 in Varieties of Religious Experience. I know the date of publication because it remains to this day for me a very seminal work in the field. So only 100 years, that's our grandparents, probably did not know that they could be any one of this range of characters, that they could be this way or that way. Instead, they were victims of their moods. They were victims of their attitudes. They were victims of their belief systems, and the people around them experienced the people around them in the same way. Well, that's just Joe. You know Joe. He's always been that way, and his dad was the same way. The idea that behavior was totally nature and had little to do with nurture, that it was in the genetics, and in fact he could have learned it from the bully up the street before he was 3 years old, that didn't occur to people, just how malleable we are. And as time marches forward, we're learning even more about the plasticity of the brain and the malleability, if I can use that word, of personality. We have this wide range of potential to be, gifts and talents and abilities. Some of them are inalienable, God-given, and not much you can do about it either way. But having acknowledged that part, my God, we have so much choice. It's mind-boggling when we start to look for a real sense of identity. And even say, wait, I have the ability to look for that identity. I don't have to stay with what's been put on me.
Yeah, for most of human history, we basically were a victim of our culture. If your culture behaved a certain way, you didn't break from that mold except at severe penalty, usually ostracism or excommunication of some sort.
Being shunned.
Yeah. People actually lived in a community and no one could acknowledge their existence. They had to pretend they weren't even there just because they behaved differently than most people behave. Well, within the last 100 years, we've really allowed more freedom of expression. More people can be more different than their neighbors than they used to be able to be. Part of it's the United States is a great experiment in that because people have come from every part of the world to be here. We no longer have just one homogeneous culture any longer. So here in the United States. So being different's okay, but not. It's not a normal thing. It's not part of our heritage. It's new. It's still a new thing. As you quoted William James, I think that quotation ends with something like that. The most amazing discovery is that we can change ourselves by altering our attitudes of mind. William James knew that by deciding to be different, we could behave different. But now we know that by deciding to be different, we can actually change the very structure of our brain. We can literally restructure the physiology of our brain by creating new habits and new ways of thinking. And you cannot create a new habit unless you are awake. You don't realize you're doing something habitually unless you can step out of the habit of doing it and look at it and observe yourselves doing something habitually. So that's the incredible value of the higher self, is that you can observe yourself and choose all the habits that you like walking with your left foot first and your right foot next. You can leave that habit alone, and you can take a look at the other habits, like the way you treat your fellow human being, and say, oh, I want to change that one. I want to become more awake, more aware. I want to do this more consciously than just on autopilot.
This is really a game of mirrors and images. I'm thinking, as I listen to you speak, of that self-portrait that M.C. Escher did of himself holding a crystal ball, and reflected, you see from his point of view, himself reflected in that crystal ball. And that also reminds me of an even earlier experience that I used to love, going to the barber shop as a kid.
With the mirrors in front and the mirrors in back. I remember that.
Yes, and your head, of course, is right in the middle, almost as if to say, here's the point.
You try to move it, but it stays in the middle.
You try to get your head out of the way.
It won't go.
So you can see to infinity But infinity bends as your head moves. It's almost as if no matter where you go, infinity starts right behind your head. Not to get too poetic here, but there is allegory and metaphor and richness. There's also the fractal, the model of the fractal, not just a reflection, but fractals are shapes that unfold in such a way that you can use a computer program to zoom into infinity, and it continues to reveal these same patterns, like take a piece of fern and pull a little piece off it, and what you have is what you just had, only in miniature. And then you take a little piece off of that, and darn, it looks exactly like the big one, except now it's still smaller, and you keep doing that all the way to infinity. There are these mathematical models for that. To see infinity, as the mystics used to say, in a grain of sand. To see everything that exists in every tiny particle, and to be aware that that's just as true as every particle existing in this one universe, and that those things are reflections of each other. Everything in the one, and the one in everything, is to say, wait a minute, shake off that identity of self, that guy in the mirror, as Michael Jackson would say. Take a step back and think of that guy in the mirror being a reflection of the person in front of the mirror, also being a reflection of some point of view, some energy, some organized matrix of consciousness called awareness or consciousness, and that the physical body we move through is just that, a vehicle or an instrument. That's a nice place to begin to shift gears a little bit and alter your perspective.
And so how do you know which one it is? How do you know which one is that higher consciousness, that awareness, that one that is the perspective or the point of view we're talking about? And the answer to that is really pretty easy. It's the one that isn't afraid. I mean, it really comes down to every other voice you have inside of yourself has some fears because survival is at stake. In every other part of your being, in consciousness, in subconsciousness, in every other part of your being, survival is an issue here. So it's worried about dying, and so therefore there's some paranoia, there's some fear, there's some fight or flight instinct going on, around every kind of thought and feeling. But the higher self, well, it can't die. It always was. It's part of the energy of the universe, and it's connected to all that is, and it's not worried about death, and it's really even not worried about being hurt or attacked, because it knows that there's nothing that's really dangerous except those things that really are dangerous, and it knows in terms of the body, the autopilot will kick in and fight or flight will take over, and it'll do the best it can do. So it knows, the higher self knows that worry does no good at all. That there's no value in worry or in feeling any fear. There's nothing to be afraid of. So from the perspective of the higher self, it always feels like love. It always feels like joy and happiness and compassion and wisdom and confidence and all those positive emotions. If there's anything that causes the body to tighten up or the breath to be held, if there's anything that causes the eyes to want to dart in different directions or the head to jerk one way if there's anything that causes any alert kind of feeling, that's not the higher self. The higher self's the one that says, okay, we can put it all down now. We're safe. Let's, instead of having to watch out, let's watch in.
So when we do a series like this of not regular podcasts, obviously this is a premium audio program, a series of premium audio programs with some really profound concepts in it. The title, Finding Yourself in Paradise. We'll talk about the paradise part in a minute. That's the level of awareness that we seek to gain this perspective or this particular point of view. The higher self. Let's say it simply. Within the ultimate unity of all things, we're in a universe, okay? And think of what religious people consider God, not as a separated being very far away, but somehow as a container or a totality of all of that, and that every particle and everything is within that oneness. And as we said a few minutes ago, consider that that oneness is also in every seemingly separated thing. Now remember, it's not just Diversity, as Steve is explaining, we're talking about uniqueness, a universe, a one thing, a one life that manifests itself not only in a bunch of different ways, but in absolutely unique ways. So not only are you different from other people, you are absolutely unique, one of a kind. Now, doesn't that mean that knowing this genuineness, this authentic one-of-a-kindness that you are, might be pretty important in the scheme of things? And yet we're in a world that has evolved to a point where people are mostly interested in other people so they can manage other people and get what they want from other people. And the idea of knowing yourself, to manage yourself, to produce what you need yourself and experience on behalf of the universe, that diversity and that uniqueness, well, I'm afraid that just hasn't occurred to very many people. And if it has occurred to you, well, congratulations. You're in exactly the right place. This is what Aristotle meant when he coined the concept of metaphysics, that you are not your material self. You are not that separated being. You are energy. That's what a spirit is. It's an energy. And gosh, didn't we all learn in the 7th or 8th grade that you cannot create or destroy energy? I think there's a pretty clear law of physics there. And if that's true for physical energy, maybe it's true for metaphysical energy. Maybe you are an energy, a point of view that cannot be created nor destroyed, that is part of one life and yet exists not only in a diverse but also a unique way. This is heavy stuff, and yet you work it. It's like cold clay, I think, Steve. You just got to work with it in your hands to get some warmth in there, and then the clay softens, and now it's, oh, wait a minute, this is starting to make sense. And it boggles the mind that, well, what could I be?
Well, that's the bottom line. Like, it gives you the power to ask the question, what could I be? That I could now, given that I'm unique, given that I'm one of a kind, given that I'm not a body and not thoughts and not feelings, that I'm this energy, and that I'm in charge of that, I could, like, conform this energy into almost any form I want. I can't break the laws of physics. I can't turn me into somebody who's going to be 6'6", you know. I can't change my genetics. But what I can do is virtually create my personality. I can virtually create my goals and my dreams. I can create finding those gifts, talents, and abilities that are best and strongest and most wondrous inside of me, and finding a unique way of putting them together and manifesting and making myself into whatever, pretty much whatever I want to be. Not just anything, because I can't be anything, but I can be what it's in me to be. I can be the best manifestation of all the different parts that are in me to become. And that's where the higher self comes in, because it becomes the conductor, the director, the orchestrator, the choreographer of the whole process of life. You get to step back and you think, what kind of thoughts do I want to think? What kind of feelings do I want to feel? What kind of habits do I want to have? And what kind of urges do I want to respond to or do I want to pull back from? I mean, the bottom line is you can now look at your urges. Like, for example, losing your temper. That's a urge. You get angry because you're hurt and you lash out. Well, from the higher self perspective, it can see, well, look at that. I got angry, and underneath that's the hurt. Now, how am I going to choose to behave with that? Do I want to lose my temper? I can. It's an option available to me. Or do I choose to behave in a different way? The urge, like, wow, she's really pretty and I'm really horny, you know, that urge is often not best acted upon. I mean, there are times that gets you in really big trouble. So from a higher self perspective, and this is something a 19-year-old could learn to do. I mean, from a higher self perspective, you could learn to control those urges that take you in negative directions. In fact, anytime you do control those urges, that's what you've done.
Think of how much of our behavior, certainly as children, hopefully less so as we mature, but for many people throughout their entire lives, are chemically induced urges. They're glandular impressions. They have an electrochemical component, and consciousness just goes, okay, right?
Right. Looks dangerous, let's hit it.
Or looks beautiful.
Let's make love to it. Or,
yeah, whatever. And so we just react unconsciously.
Actually, let's have sex with it, because making love is a conscious thing. That doesn't just happen. Yeah,
it's a fine line, but an important distinction,
Yeah.
the type we're talking about. The difference between lust and love, for example, can be argued as one of frequency. And the higher the frequency, the finer the frequency, the more refined, the more civilized, the more divine, really, or godlike human beings can be. But here's the rub. We have to choose that. It can't be put upon us.
right.
You see? And I don't think church, temple, or mosque can guilt trip us into it, though we got about 2,000 years of that, right? Or society, we've got threat of eternal damnation or prison for those who are still alive, and that'll make you a good person. The idea that we have internal codes is being overlooked. The idea that we have a conscience and a consciousness and that we are conscientious, these are words that need to be clearly understood. And I mean, we do have this model of the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder, the temptation to be bad and the aspiration to be good. But I think it's a little deeper than that, a little more complicated than that. And I guess what I'm saying is, in this breakthrough to a new you that we're promoting, in this aspiration to find the higher self, your better angels, so to speak, in paradise, through meditation, paradise thinking, the alpha brainwave state, not only do you find qualities in yourself and particular interests, things that you love to do and might not have even known that you love doing them if you hadn't been in the pursuit, right? But I guess what I'm saying here is that there are qualities of being that come forward as well as you aspire to find the truth of who you are in terms of your talents and your gifts and your interests, following your heart, so to speak. There's a really sweet, kind person that's coming out also. You become more generous. You become more forgiving. You become more passionate. It seems you care less about the part of self that seems to be separated and find yourself caring more about the part of yourself that is shared. And to find that balance point between the oneness of all things and the absolute diversity of all things, that's the paradox.
And that you can't do that in the day-to-day attitudes.
Normal consciousness.
Yeah.
No.
It takes stepping out. It takes stepping back. It takes looking at it from a different point of view perspective. So from the perspective of the new you, what can you do that's different than the old you? Well, the new you has the ability to, starting at the very bottom, to control urges. The negative urges to run or hit, that urge we have to, to lash out or to be angry, the sexual urges that are inappropriate, we can control urges. A level higher than urges, though, are impulses, where we have a thought to just say something, or we have a thought to just do something, and we look before we leap, or we blurt something without consideration. The higher self can take that extra moment and look before you leap and think about or observe what's the likely outcome if I do say this in this scenario, without just blurting things, without just impulsively acting. The higher consciousness has the ability to take that extra moment and make a decision that, let's look at both sides, let's look at the outcomes here. This can all be done in a millisecond. I mean, the speed the mind works. But it is literally the look before you leap moment. And when you are coming from higher consciousness, it's the natural impulse to do that. That is, from higher consciousness, you always take that extra moment, you take that extra look before you make that leap into whatever it is you're going to do. So not only did you control those urges, the survival and sexual urges that can get you in big trouble because you behave inappropriately, but you control those impulses that get you into little trouble, like saying the wrong kinds of things or false starts in the wrong direction or all kinds of impulsive things that you do without thinking, or I shouldn't say without thinking, by agreeing with your thoughts instead of stepping back and realizing you're not your thoughts. That's just submitted for your approval. Do you want to approve of that thought and follow it or not?
And let's revisit your early comments here about distinguishing between the two selves in terms of the two kinds of feelings, or the two groups. I mean, all feelings, if we bifurcate them, are either positive or negative. The positive or love-based feelings, safe, relaxed, kind, generous, compassionate, joy, peace of mind. The fear-based are all the ones that hurt. And just as the love-based represent what we do know about ourselves and the life around us, the fear-based has a relationship to what we do not understand about the self. So where's the higher self? Well, it's in the direction of what you do know. The higher self is revealed by following your heart, by what you love to do, what makes you happy, what brings a little joy to your heart, what lightens your step and your load through life. And if you find yourself, on the other hand, as a religious person might say, tempted, to take that lower route to something selfish, I want it, so I'm going to do it or say it, no matter who gets hurt, I just don't care. And you're ignoring your better nature and following the fear, the confusion, the ignorance. That's going to take you right back to ego. The tricky thing here is the way ego, the separated part that makes so many bad decisions because it's rooted in fear, the way it can dress up and pretend that it's the higher self. And the instrument of this feat is rationalization. The mind will concoct some excuse after the fact for how your intention was really good and holy and righteous, when you know in your heart of hearts that was selfish and short-sighted, and you wanted it because you wanted it, and you succumbed to your fears and your temptations. You didn't really think it through. Everybody has that conscience, that consciousness with a conscience, with a soul that knows right from wrong.
With the exception of the sociopath that proves the rule.
And the rest of us in high-stress situations. Again, this is why we have to find ourselves in paradise. We have to manage the fear to see the love. Fear is not stronger than love. The negative, egoic side is not more powerful than your angelic, better nature.
Right. Darkness isn't stronger than light. Light always wins. Cold isn't stronger than heat. Heat always wins.
But when you identify with it, it filters out the love and the light, that's for sure. And a lot of us hold on to our fear. We use fear. We think fear somehow protects us. It gets so crazy, a lot of people think the way to feel safe is to always be frightened. And if I'm always frightened, and I'm always girding my loins, and I'm always tense, and I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop, then I'll feel safe. And I have to say to these people, well, how's that working for you? And they go, well, not very well at all, but they don't know what else to do. Well, how about feeling safe? Oh, no, I'm too afraid to do that.
And it's instinctual in a way. We are descendant from the most paranoid. Those people who were looking around for something dangerous all the time saw the dangerous things before the people who were more relaxed. But we live in a very different world now. This last 100 years has changed everything. We don't have wild animals attacking us. We are not in danger. A little bit on the freeway once in a while. We don't even have freeways on Maui. How wonderful that is. But basically, we're not really in life-threatening danger very often anymore at all, but we are descendant from all those people who were, and so the autopilot is set on fight or flight, on being paranoid, on not feeling safe unless we're feeling afraid. Now, there's an exception to that. There's always one exception to that, at least, and that's sleep. There's a point in our lives every single day virtually where we say, okay, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to not feel endangered anymore. I'm going to trust that when I close my eyes until I open them again, that nothing bad's going to happen. So we do have the ability every single day of our lives to let that fear go, to drop that fear. But what we're saying is you can be in that state almost all the time, except when there is real danger around you. And even by doing a little bit of the time is wonderful. An important point, there's nothing wrong with having that selfish thought of, like, I want to do this selfish, stupid thing, because I want to. The thought is fine. If we didn't have the thought and we repressed the thought, it would manifest itself as some emotional need to do that kind of thing. We want to have the thought, but then we want to, from a higher self perspective, say to that thought, I choose not to act on that thought and release the power of the thought by releasing the breath and feeling safe. Whenever we release our breath and feel safe, we take away the power of the thought. We take away the power of it to make us feel unsafe because we're making ourselves feel safe. So the bottom line here is all thoughts are good, bad thoughts are good thoughts are good. From a higher self perspective, you can choose the good ones and release the bad ones. But if you're not coming from a higher self perspective and you follow all of your thoughts, then you're going to follow the bad ones impulsively, and that's what gets you in trouble.
If you look at our little furry feathered friends, woodland creatures, and animals are pretty nervous if you really watch them. And the ones that seem especially nervous and on guard, of course, are the survivors, as you've pointed out. But
the predators don't seem all that nervous, actually. The hawks and the eagles. The ones that seem nervous are the prey. And those are the ones that seem nervous.
Although there's always, you got to serve somebody.
That's right. I suppose that's true. Polar bears maybe don't, but beyond that.
There's a level, for most critters, somebody a little bigger, a little nastier is going to come along and eat them. The most dangerous animals, of course, are the human beings.
Oh, by far.
I took a friend backpacking many years ago, and he'd never been out, and I laid all the gear out, and he said, sleeping bag, stove, food, cool, where's the guns? And I said, what guns? And he thought backpackers all carried weapons. Wow. I said, no, we're going away from the dangerous animals. He said, the bears and the lions? I said, no, the people. We'll be safe with the bears and the lions and the rattlesnakes. Just leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. And I think it was for both of us, really, a bit of a eye-opener to realize that humans are by far the most dangerous creatures. We're often the most irrational and can be far less sensitive and intuitive even than some little wildland critter. So our potential to be both good and bad, to risk our lives to save a stranger, you see it all the time. This full range of potential is within everyone. I think the psychoanalyst Carl Jung did a good job of describing over 100 years ago the dark side or the shadow in everyone. And if we succumb to our fears, we can become these horrible, terrible... animals don't have war. Was Thomas Aquinas right? Is there such a thing as a good war? Or at some point will humanity recognize that violence never solved any problem, only makes things worse? And at the end of war, or any kind of conflict, you have to sit down and negotiate. You have to talk it over and work it out. Why not just skip the war and the violence and the hunger, the extreme poverty? Just sidestep all of that. A fraction of what we spend on war would solve all the problems that lead to war. Why don't we do it? Because of the amount of money there is to be made in war. I came across a statistic just the other day that all of the hungry people of the world could be fed, and this would reduce the world birth rate, not increase it. Best way to reduce birth rate is to feed and educate people. That all of the hungriest people in the world could be fed adequate diets for half of what the United States alone spends on ice cream.
Wow.
Swear to God.
We could take everyone on the planet out of what's called extreme poverty, which is a hunger, deprivation, of not having clean water. Basically make sure everybody has the minimum survival, at least, for half of what we spend on 31 flavors of ice cream.
On ice cream. And again, keep in mind, that's not, there are some people that...
But I like ice cream. Oh,
there are people that think, well...
How about twice what we spend on broccoli? How about that?
There are people that think that starvation limits the population. Get it straight. Do your due diligence. Hunger and starvation promotes and accelerates population. When people,
when you think your kids are going to die, you have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. So the more impoverished, the more children there are. The best form of birth control is to feed people and give them books. And one day, bombers will fly over, and instead of dropping explosive devices on people, they'll drop bread and books.
Kindles.
And maybe solar rechargeable.
Yeah, Kindles.
But you see, this is the point. What part of us wants to fight the war? The part that's afraid and believes we need to. And maybe in some people an even deeper, darker part that says, well, it's a great way to make a lot of money, you see. And somebody with an even darker agenda says, so that we can control the resources like their oil, for example, or take advantage of the fact that these workers will work for $5 a week or $5 a day instead of $50 an hour in Detroit, right? There is a better nature in everyone, and yet it may not be the result of society or civilization or some grand social movement that we awaken, but rather the work of countless individuals turning within and saying, is there a higher self here? Am I more than my fear? Could I also be my dreams? In fact, could my dreams and my better nature, my better angels, so to speak, represent the best in me, enfolded within me, waiting to be discovered and then developed and then brought forward, countless numbers of individuals doing this on their own and in small groups, classes, and seminars? I think now we're talking about changing the world, not en masse, as great societies and great movements, and government can help in this area, private industry, all institutions can help. But I think we're talking about a stage of self-discovery that fundamentally has to be initiated by the individual.
Yeah, because the more we give into the fear, the more dangerous the world appears to be, and the more dangerous the world appears to be, the more we give into the fear. So what we have to do is we have to go away from what feels dangerous toward what feels safe, and we call that finding yourself in paradise. So paradise is not just a location. You know, paradise is a real live thing. Maui is a paradise that we've chosen to come live on. But paradise is a state of mind. It's a state technically called the alpha brainwave state. It's a state in between stressed out and asleep. It's a focused concentration, a focused passion kind of place. Paradise is a real nice name for it, because paradise does not just mean something that's beautiful. It also must be safe. I mean, if you're in a beautiful place with wild animals attacking you, that's not paradise. It's got to be a safe place. So we create an internal paradise, a mind-heart paradise, a place where we think we're safe, we feel we're safe, and therefore we become safe and allow for that perspective of the higher self to emerge. And it always starts with one slow, conscious, deep breath. So let's do that. One deep breath. And as you release, relax and find inside your mind that paradise place of perfect peace. All your tension release.
Create and sense a feeling of letting go, of fear and anxiety, of worry and doubt, carried in your body as muscular tension. Drop it. Feel the letting go. It's funny, you don't use tension to push away tension. You don't fight with your tendency to fight. It can't defeat the part of you that refuses to be defeated, but you can let it go. Just drop it, like yesterday's garbage in yesterday's newspaper. Release it. Let it go. And risk feeling just a little safer and a little more relaxed, because your brain is watching you. And even now, your brain is saying, oh, we're feeling safer and more relaxed. I don't have to worry so much. I can relax. I don't have to be quite so on guard. Apparently, there's no real danger around. Look, my eyes are closed, and my breathing is regulated and slow and rhythmic, and every once in a while, I take a nice, really slow, deep breath and feel that sigh of relief, that sigh that is release. And even my muscles are feeling relaxed. Your brain is saying, And so the frequency of brain waves begins to slow. And even now, as your body remains rather still, your mind begins to quiet as you listen to Steve and me, to our narrative, and your emotional nature begins to calm. Your point of view becomes elevated. As a result, it's as if the magnetic nature of love as safety and peace lifts you so that your horizons are expanded and you see more, you understand more, and you identify with a bigger picture that goes beyond the boundaries of what you thought was self. And you see you have an interest in the people that you love and care about, winning, doing better. You have an interest in the success of people you love. And as this process continues to unfold and your point of view is elevated higher still, you're finding a whole new sense of self that now sees an interest, a benefit in what happens in your community, in your world. And the boundaries that once contained your interests and what you thought was relevant and personal to you have expanded to the point where there are no boundaries at all.
So, this is paradise. You are here. And from this place, be very clear that if the voice inside your mind that you hear is filled with anger or hurt or fear, that's not the voice you want to hear. The voice of the higher self comes through with a sound of love and passion too, and a feeling of being safe and secure, confident, very sure. So listen to the sound of the voice or the clarity of the pictures that you see or the feelings that you feel. Make sure they heal. Experience them positively. The higher self feels safe. No danger is real. The higher self focuses on feeling positive, and what is negative, it heals. So, by entering this paradise and feeling safer and safer as you do, you open up a channel for the higher self to come through. And remember, it sounds like love, and it looks like joy, and it feels like happiness, and it's a tool you can employ to look at your thoughts and feelings, choose how you want to behave, to manage your urges and impulses, to be courageous and brave, and to take a look at all of your habits, the things you automatically do, and choose which of those continue to serve and which ones you'd like to renew. Because you can change any habit from this perspective of the higher self. You can reprogram your mind, and as you do, you'll find you can change your habits and your health. So manage your urges, your impulses, your habits, your thoughts, and your feelings too, from this perspective of the higher self, from this amazing point of view.
You are not your physical body that seems separated and alienated from all other forms, although that's a very important part of who you are. You have extended into that body. It's yours. Care for it. It's a temple, in a sense. It's a whole universe for which you're responsible. But you are not limited to that body. You are not limited to the senses and sensations of that body. Although what you see and hear, taste and smell, what you reach out and touch is certainly part of who you are and part of your experience of being in this existence. But you're not limited to the body or its sensations. You are not your thoughts or your feeling, your speech or your behavior, although that's certainly part of who you are. But the I am that stands above all of these things and more. The I am that exists in form, but also above and free of form. That elevated perspective is the higher self, and it shares the ground of all that is, and has that expanded perspective, that concept of somehow touching everything as you witness everything, touching everything. And both things are true. A universe, one life, expressing in multiple diverse forms as spirit and matter. And you are the awareness behind it all and above it all. Follow that aspiration to know thyself and then be true to that self, such that you could not be false to anyone, as long as you're true to that higher true self.
And with that sense of higher true self clear, knowing it feels safe and free of fear, and knowing that any time you choose it can reappear, just come back to paradise, just come back here. But for now, it's time to return from narrow awake to the state more wide. So in a few moments, prepare to open your eyes. One deep breath, mind getting clear, aware of where you're sitting, become aware of now and here, and open your eyes and come back to wide awake. Back to wide awake.
Feeling fine, rested, and restored, coming down into the self where you feel you are your body and you are your thoughts, but again, you're just one slow, deep breath away, just one conscious willingness to let go of fear. That's all it takes for you to begin to move upward toward this higher sense of self. So it's just like going through the gears in an old standard transmission car. You know, first gear is good when you first get going, but it's no place for a long cruise. Fifth gear is great for cruising, but not much good for getting started. So go through the gearbox, learn to use these various levels of mind and points of view. When you're afraid, when you're nervous and confused, that separated self will serve you just fine. But in your better moments, when you're really feeling safe and can aspire to the best that's in you, then unclutch, release the fear, the tension, and float up toward this higher perspective, and it all becomes more clear. It's that aha. We all know the eureka illumination as a spontaneous experience. Wouldn't you like to go there on demand?
And, you know, this show today, Breakthrough to a New You, sort of harkens back to an earlier era in our lives when we did a radio show called Breakthrough. But the first of the shows we did on this series, and the Finding Yourself in Paradise, was on the higher self, and it feels to me like we've sort of come around full circle in a way, and it makes me realize we've got 90 shows that we've done. And so it occurs to me that there's a lot of shows that you haven't maybe heard and you might be interested in hearing. So there's a little button over to the left that says, show me my unpurchased podcasts. And, you know, if there's a particular area of your life right now that you're going through, it occurs to me that very well may be a program that we've done that covers that exact topic.
And you get to buy, as a subscriber, all of the archived programs for the same price, 99 cents. Others who come in the store whether through the front door or the back door. It's usually $1.99 for these programs if you buy them from the library or the archive. But whether you are not a subscriber paying $1.99 or a subscriber paying the same price you pay for the current shows, know that you can always send them to your friends as soon as you get them in your library, that built-in player, right? Send as many as you want to your friends, as often as you want, and we think that way everybody wins. Again, 90 programs already, and a year from now there will be 50 more, and so on. That's how it works. So send one to a friend, check out the archive, be sure and join us next week. And as always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner, and aloha from Maui.